can be easy to give in to the temptation of opening a new clothing account or get the credit card or personal loan to pay for that holiday. However, it is important to keep in mind that all these things, they affect your credit score. In studio to explain to us how credit scores are determined and what you should do to improve it is Magauta Mphahlele, accredited court annexed mediator at the National Debt Mediation Association, Geoff Miller, CEO of TransUnion, and I'm joined also by the Finweek journalist Buhle Ndweni, who wrote the story. Magauta, let me start with you. What are the things that people are doing wrong that count against them when we look at a credit score?
Well, first thing, people don't understand how credit bureaus work and what information is kept on the bureaus. They also don't understand how their payment behavior affects their credit bureau report. You know, a lot of consumers think that if you skip a month and pay double next month, you know, you will be fine. Or if you pay half, or if you don't, you know, you are a few days late, it's okay. It's actually not okay, because that will give the credit provider an indication of whether you're a good payer or a bad payer. So it's quite important that people understand that they need to pay on time and they need to pay the full amount. And if they cannot do that, it's better to engage with the credit providers. A lot of the time, when people are experiencing payment difficulties, they keep quiet, you know, they don't take telephone calls, and they don't understand that as long as they don't communicate with the credit provider, there are steps that credit providers then take that would then reflect on their bureau report. For example, if your account is handed over to legal, or if then the credit provider writes off the debt or notes you as a defaulter, all that information will then reflect. Whereas if you engage with them, you might delay some of those processes, or they might not happen at all, because you then can come to an arrangement with a credit provider.
Geoff, if I'm sitting in a situation now where I have been handed over and my name is tarnished, how do I get it back, and how long does that process take?
So you know, there's very technical rules around how long data is kept, but pretty much generally around 24 months. That being said, it depends on how delinquent or how late you were. So as she mentioned, if you were 30 days late and you've caught up, credit grantors aren't going to look necessarily too unfavorably about that. But if they see a consistent pattern of misbehavior, then they're going to be very wary about loaning money to that. So I think best thing to do is pay on time. If you don't pay on time, make sure you get caught up on your payments and continue to keep up with those. So, you know, it depends. It really depends. But you know, 2 years if you really go bad.
2 years. Buhle, you wrote the story. What were some of the key things that came out? I mean, we do have our panel of experts here. Insights on what you discovered when you were writing the story.
I think there seems to be some confusion about the National Credit Amnesty Act. You know, people thought, well, everything is going to be written off, you know, once they have either made a payment or something. So I don't know from the experts' side or point of view, for people out there at home, I mean, what happens if maybe you have paid it off and I want now to add more credit or ask for more credit? In which state are you at?
So once again, it depends on how bad the situation was. I think one of the good things that came out of the credit amnesty and then the Credit Act was that if you do have a judgment against you and you pay up that judgment, you don't have to go to court anymore to get a rescission. You can go directly to the lender will issue that, and we'll remove that data from the bureau. So that if it's really bad, you know, that would be the first step that I would take, is pay off the judgment, go to your credit provider, they'll issue a letter, and we'll remove that information. But that being said, you know, if you're paying poorly, just because the judgment is now off, there's still going to be a reflection of that negative behavior that remains on the credit bureau. And to be frank, there has to be, because if they had wiped off everything, lenders would be afraid to lend because they wouldn't know. So I think, you know, they tried to, you know, I guess do the best they could to give some relief to consumers, but still make sure that the lending system was maintained.
Okay, and just another question, when one is maybe looking for vehicle loans or a home loan, you know, you're often encouraged to shop around.
Yes.
Yep.
And yet when you shop around, it kind of weighs against you. Why is that, and how does that work?
So crediting, we call them credit inquiries. So that basically tracks every time you go and apply for credit. because it's actually very predictive. But we do distinguish between what we would call rate shopping and what would just be normal credit behavior. So actually models and credit grantors will look and see if you had 3 auto loan inquiries or vehicle asset finance in a 30-day period, they would count that as 1. Or same with the home loans. However, if you went and shopped for 6 microfinance loans in consecutive days, that would be deemed risky behavior because you're out trying to get money any which way you can. So we do try to cater for that. It's not 100% perfect, but in general, we would encourage rate shopping. It's absolutely the responsible thing to do, and it's really not going to harm you dramatically.
Okay. Magauta, I'm looking at your title, and you are an accredited court annexed mediator at the National Debt Mediation Association. Firstly, what is it that you do? And when it comes to debt counseling or debt management, if somebody's already in debt counseling, they're now out, how long after are they now able to start asking for financing again?
As the NDMA, I think we think the first step is to look at somebody's behavior, and we try and change people's behavior. So when a person approaches us, we would look at their credit bureau record and say, how are you managing your repayments? And then we would look at their expenses to say, how are you managing your expenses? And sometimes just by doing that, a person can go back to normalizing their repayments. So we don't rush to put people under debt counseling. And then those that have like large areas and something has happened in their lives such that they cannot afford the monthly installments, sometimes the only solution is to restructure those debts so that you can afford the repayments while still also affording your living expenses. And that is good to restructure because then it doesn't affect your credit bureau report so badly, because if you don't restructure, don't talk to your credit provider, the next step is legal action. Then you would have a judgment against your name, a default against your name. So it's better for a period of months to take the pain, because some people say, but no, I'm still going to pay more interest, so I don't want to restructure. But you leave the problem, the next thing you have a judgment that sits for 5 years on your record. So we help people to understand their situation and then help them understand all the options that are there, and objectively then decide on an option that will alleviate your problem, but also help you to understand your own behavior and change it over the long term so that you don't get back into that situation.
If I may just go, how understanding are credit providers? Because they're seen as these institutions whereby they just want their money back.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the time there are huge call centers, and the call center agent has a mandate of what they can agree to. And that is why sometimes it's better to go to an expert, because we know that how to approach them, what kind of information they require, because consumers don't do the homework or the preparatory work to engage. So you call the call center, they say we want so much, and you sort of back off because, but if you've done your homework, you've done your budget, you've done your expenses, you are able to say to the credit provider, these are my monthly expenses, this is what I can afford. And if you don't get help, you escalate. So a lot of consumers just end up at the call center, and and they do help, but sometimes they are not helpful. And each consumer has their own story of what is happening in their lives. And you need somebody who's able to convey that story, but also who knows the law. Because if I know the law, I can engage on equal terms, but a consumer doesn't know the law, so they can be brushed off and then just go away. So that's where we come in.
Geoff, let me come to you. You've spoken about what you can do if you're in a bad situation to get out. Let's talk about good habits that people can do to get their credit rating score up. If you have a credit card and you go over the limit, one, I'm just curious to know, does this count against you? And number two, just what are some of the things that people aren't aware of that can really boost their rating?
Yeah, so I guess first thing, most important thing you can do is pay your bills on time. That is, by and large, the most influential factor that lenders look at. The second factor, as you kind of alleviated to, although a little bit more indirectly, is credit utilization. So for instance, if I have 3 credit cards and I can charge up to 30,000 Rand on those credit cards, and I've charged 29,000 Rand, that would mean you're highly leveraged. If I'd only charged 10,000 Rand, that would mean I'm slightly leveraged. So the more leveraged you are, the more detrimental that would be viewed. If you go over your credit limit, that is typically something between you and your lender. and that wouldn't necessarily be reported negatively. I think you'd be charged a fee by the credit card provider. But what would be negative is that you're now at your credit limit, and so you've basically exhausted all of your options. I think the third thing, and we've alluded to it, is it's okay to shop for credit, but just don't do it too frequently. So I think if you pay your bills on time, you don't overextend yourself, and you're responsible when you shop, you will have a very good credit score.
Okay.
I mean, if someone were to now go and check or look for it at their credit record,
Yeah.
What is the ideal scoring that they should actually have?
Yeah.
If you're good, if you're okay, if you're awful?
Yep. Well, so a couple things. One, more people should check. So we service 300,000 consumers every year and provide them a free credit report so they can actually see on that. There's 20 million credit active consumers in South Africa. Only 300,000 a year actually come to a credit bureau to check their record. So first you have to know what's on that.
Okay.
Two, there's a multiple of credit assessments. We have our own consumer-friendly score, so it goes from 0 to 999. And what we would consider to be a good score is over 800. So that would be a good score. You would mainly be approved for credit.
Okay.
You know, when you get closer to 999, the better you are. The closer to 0 you get, the worse you are.
Magauta, just on a final one before we close off, if your identity is stolen and somebody takes your stuff and goes on a shopping spree and they've rung this huge bill that you have, what are the steps that one should take? Because you didn't ring it up, but how do you get your name cleared?
Obviously, there has to be an investigation to prove that actually it was not you who was the person who took out the credit. And we encourage consumers to report this to the Fraud Prevention Service, where their identity can then be listed there to be checked. But also, like Geoff says, check your credit bureau record all the time so that you can see the problem in time. So if you're not looking at your bureau record, you don't know what is there. Yeah. And a lot of people only get a surprise when they get to the credit provider and they say, no, but somebody's buying. So please check your credit bureau record regularly. If that has happened, go to the police, write an affidavit, and usually that, I think, Geoff, it's written off and it's taken off their record.
And in fact, you know, even not only TransUnion but other providers as well will actually allow you for a nominal fee to monitor your credit report. You sign up for a service and they'll send you an SMS every time you've applied.
Thank you so much for making the time to do it. You've heard it. Ignorance is not bliss. Thank you so much to our guest today, giving us lessons on what you can do to make sure that you have a good credit rating and what not to do.